All right, so we are going to get things started. Thank you everyone for joining, who's joining live, and this will be recorded as well. So today we're going to talk about crop diversification in the Midwest and discuss how that improves soil health and farm profitability. So my name is Sean Stokes. I'm the research director here at the Midwest Organic Center. And Drew Erickson is also on here as well. He is the farm manager here at the Rodale's Midwest Organic Center. So to start things off with a few housekeeping items for our webinar, we are going to have a Q&A session at the end of the webinar. And so if you have any questions that come up over the next 45 minutes of presentations that we have, put those in the Q&A tab. And then we will answer questions after the presentation. If you have any trouble viewing or hearing it or any sort of technology problems, feel free to call Justin with the education department at that number or message him directly in the chat and he can assist you with anything there. This webinar will be recorded and uploaded to Rodale's webpage in the next 1 to 2 weeks. And then over the course of these slides, you will see some QR codes on the slides, so feel free to utilize that smartphone and scan those QR codes, and that'll link you to some various papers and resources that I discuss along the way. All right, so without further ado, let's get into this. And so I want to start with a little perspective of agriculture in the Midwest. And so this figure from this paper by Jerry Hatfield in 2009 shows agriculture in the Raccoon River Basin. That is the river basin outside of Des Moines. And it's a similar pattern across the Midwest. But what it's showing is the fraction of the land that's devoted to small grains and alfalfa. So you can see back in the 1950s, roughly 2/3 of the production in the Midwest, and in this specific case in Iowa, was dedicated to growing different small grains like wheat or oats and alfalfa or hay. But what's happened over time is that number has decreased. And of course, over the course of time too, the corn was the other major crop at this time as well. So pretty evenly split between small grains, hay, and corn. But then the production numbers of those has really tailed off. And so we get to present day where 5 to 10% of the land use at most in the Midwest is being utilized to grow any of these small grains or hay. So you can see over time that correlates with an increase in corn production and an increase in soybean production. The land use of corn has been relatively constant over time. That's slightly been growing since then. Really what's been improving the production is an increase in yield per acre. It's really the soybean production over the course of the past 50 or 60 years that has replaced the hay and the small grains as that dominant second crop in our rotations. And so where we currently stand here is, most of us already know, is that in the Midwest, it's corn and soybeans, very much dominated by those two crops. In a lot of cases, those are being alternated year after year. In some situations, they're grown continuously as well. But here in Iowa, we have 13 million acres of corn planted and almost 10 million acres of soybeans. And then that last little fraction is majority hay. In Illinois, it's a similar pattern with mostly corn and soybeans, 11 million acres roughly of each. And in there, the primary alternative crop, primary alternative crop is wheat. If you look at all these states across the Midwest, it's a similar trend with 5 to 10% being dedicated to some type of small grain or hay, but really it's corn and soybeans that are being grown for primarily livestock feed or ethanol. So what's been happening then in our ecological systems in our communities over the course of time with these land use changes that are primarily focused on corn and soybeans now? So you can see here from this same Hatfield paper that once corn and soybean production really started to ramp up in the late 60s and 70s, we started to see an increase in our nitrate concentrations in the water supply. And so the simple conclusion looking at this is that, more corn and soybean production meant more applied nitrogen, and that led to more nitrate leaching. But what this figure shows is that it's not that simple. You can see that in the 80s, we really had a peak of our application of nitrogen, and it's actually decreased since then, even though these nitrates in the water have slowly been increasing since then as well. So really it shows that it's not that simple answer of more nitrogen in means more nitrogen out. It's really a systemic problem with the production system and this decrease in soil health that is really affecting all aspects of our agricultural systems. So the bigger question is our status quo sustainable? There's a recent study from UMass Amherst that showed in the last 160 years, essentially since the onset of Midwestern agriculture, soil erosion has averaged about 2 millimeters per year. 2 millimeters doesn't sound like much, but over 160 years, that comes out to over a foot of topsoil has been lost across the Midwest during that time. You can see this picture here from that study that in some cases that erosion can potentially be 2 or 3 feet of topsoil. And really you just have these small areas where there's a fence post or a little bit of prairie that's preventing some of that soil loss from these production systems. As we talked about, and is a very common subject these days in Iowa, nutrient leaching has become a huge problem. This year alone, 350 million pounds of nitrogen were lost in May or June just in Iowa. By the end of the year in Iowa, it's possible that 1 billion pounds of nitrogen could have left our fields and ended up in our water supply. That is polluting our local freshwater systems and eventually ends up in the Gulf of Mexico and the dead zone problem they have down there with eutrophication. The other problem relates to human health. This recent risk assessment here by Gherkin et al. Published just a few months ago showed that when controlling for all other causes of cancer, the Corn Belt had more additional cancer cases that could be attributed to differences in agricultural pesticide use patterns, more so than any other part of the country. And that also correlates to the fact that Iowa has the second highest cancer rate in the country, and corn and soybeans are the top pesticide using crops across our whole country. What was really concerning about this risk assessment too, and I will quote from their conclusion, was that the impact of pesticide use on cancer incidence may rival that of smoking. That's concerning. And so if we look at the pesticide use in corn and soybeans, 60% of the total pounds of pesticides meaning herbicides, insecticides, and fungicides altogether applied, occur in those two crops. And I had a scary realization as I was putting these slides together and looking at two independent figures from independent papers talking about two different things, that there was a disturbing pattern in the coloring of these two different figures that showed our dark green here, where we've got the most corn production across the country. But that was a disturbingly similar trend to the dark blue here that was showing the additional cancer cases per year. And that's from that risk assessment talking about the risks of pesticide use in our systems. And so there's definitely some health risks associated with our current production system. And so it's not just health and environmental risks, though, and those costs. There's rising costs of growing the corn from an economic perspective. The average input cost for growing corn was up to $550 an acre in 2023. Now, as this figure shows, fertilizer costs came down this year, so that input cost is probably decreasing as well. But that doesn't even include the costs of land rental, fuel, other incidental costs, labor costs, anything like that. And so there's an irony to it now that we are about to have potentially a record year for corn harvest. Great weather conditions have led to potentially a well over 200 bushels per acre on average of corn that we might see here in the coming harvest. But corn is currently less than $4 a bushel. So our farmers are doing a fantastic job at growing corn, and we're going to have record yields, but at the same time, a lot of these farmers are going to struggle to break even. So it seems like we're at a little bit of a headway here. Like, where can we go from here? We've got rising costs of inputs, rising costs to our environment. And so the question is, what is our path forward? What is wrong with a system that has record yields, but is not actually profitable for a lot of these farmers. And so what is our path forward at this point? And where that leads us is to input reduction. If we can apply less inputs, that is improving farm profitability. There's less cost going into these systems. We're improving our soil and ecological health. We're improving our human health. And our current status quo just isn't cutting it at this point. But how can we actually reduce our inputs and still maintain yields? And the answer to that is by building soil health. And we build soil health by starting with crop diversity. Monoculture systems with corn and soybeans being alternated every year are detrimental to our soil health. They require lots of inputs to keep them going, and we need more diversity in our systems. And so how does crop diversity lead to soil health, you might ask? And so let's take a step back and let's discuss a little bit about what soil health is, because it's a very general topic that covers a lot of stuff. And so the USDA, and this is the most common definition of soil health, the USDA defines it as the continued capacity of soil to function as a vital living ecosystem that sustains plants, animals, and humans. So soil health is more than just sustaining the plants. It's about sustaining the whole living ecosystem, from the soil in my backyard or on my farm to the community, to the impacts that it has regionally and nationally as well. It all starts with soil health, because a healthy soil is like a sponge. It's going to hold water and nutrients for our plants and prevent those from getting into our water supply. It's going to filter out pollutants, and it's going to more efficiently cycle nutrients. And so by regulating water flow with better infiltration and water holding capacity, we have less flooding and erosion, more storage of water when we get into these droughts that have become more and more frequent. It's going to filter these pollutants, cycle these nutrients, and really it sustains life on Earth. 95% of our food is directly or indirectly dependent on the soil that is being degraded at alarming rates at this point. And what really holds all of these different soil health functions together is the carbon. So yes, it's great to sequester carbon from the atmosphere, but that carbon in there is really what is influencing the physical, the chemical, the biological properties of the soil that lead to these improved outcomes. And so we hear a lot about regenerative agriculture these days. And what it comes down to, that regenerative agriculture and soil health are very much the same thing, because regenerative agriculture is an outcome. It's not a process. And that outcome is focused on one thing, and that is improving soil health. If you can build soil health, that is a regenerative system. And so really there's these core principles here of regenerative agriculture. So one of which is the context of the farm. Every farm is unique, with unique climates, unique equipment and skills and markets available. So that's always an overriding principle of regenerative agriculture, is that context. But why regenerative management starts with crop diversity is that when we start diversifying our crop rotations and allowing for more cover crops and different cash crops to be grown, we're allowing an opportunity to keep the soil covered year round and have those living roots year round, which are fundamental principles of keeping that soil in place and not eroding. By growing different types of cover crops and having a little more diversity, we can start to integrate livestock into these systems. And all of these things together are going to lead to a reduction in soil disturbance. And so let's talk about soil disturbance for a moment, because soil disturbance and input reduction are really two sides of the same coin. When I talk about soil disturbance, I bet most of your minds went immediately to tillage. And that's correct. That is a physical soil disturbance. But there are other types of soil disturbances. There's chemical soil disturbances. If you put a synthetic nitrogen fertilizer on a soil, there is going to be chemical disruption of the soil aggregates, and you are disturbing the soil in the same way that tillage disturbs the soil. There are biological disturbances. When you apply pesticides such as fungicides and herbicides, you're disturbing the biology of that soil and reducing the soil life in there. And so there's all different types of disturbances. And so if you're in a regenerative organic system, our goal is to minimize the soil disturbance and minimize the tillage. A lot of organic systems have a lot of tillage, but by doing more regenerative principles, we can reduce that physical soil disturbance. There are also regenerative conventional systems, and the goal in those systems is to reduce the chemical and the biological disturbances, reducing those inputs, because all of those inputs are costs and costs that out of the farmer's economic balances. And so that's the goal moving forward of this regenerative management, is input reduction. And so I want to take that and kind of build on a couple trials here in Iowa that have been done. The first one being a crop diversification study that was conducted at Iowa State at the Marsden Farm. And this is a conventional system. It started in 2003. So this paper here that the QR code links to is from the first 8 years of that study, but it's still ongoing and still showing these types of results and these types of soil improvements. And so basically what they did is they took a 2-year rotation, corn and soybeans, status quo with average rates of herbicides and inorganic fertilizers, and they compared that to a 3-year rotation where they added in a small grain and underseeded a clover and reduced their inputs, but then also added manure. So getting a little bit more of those regenerative practices into this conventional system. And then they had a 4-year rotation, one with a small grain, and then a year of pasture following that, again with these reduced inputs and manure. And so what did their results show? And so this figure on the right is a little confusing, so let me walk you through it. So what this is this figure is showing normalized values. So the very outside of the figure is the largest absolute value from these 3 rotations. And then the other tick marks here are kind of the percentage of that maximum value that these other lines show. So you can see the black line is the 2-year rotation, the dashed line is the 3-year rotation, and the gray line here is the 4-year rotation. So let's start with yield and profit. You can see that all of them had relatively the same amount of profit per acre, regardless of the amount of years in rotation. And then actually the 3- and 4-year rotations had better corn and soybean yields. But now, most importantly, let's look at the input reductions. You can see here that the 2-year rotation had 90% more synthetic inputs such as nitrogen, had more herbicide applied, which led to more freshwater toxicity. There was more energy used in these systems. These are all detrimental to surrounding ecological health, soil health, and detrimental to the checkbook of the farmer who has to spend more money to get what is also slightly less yield. And so when you reduce these inputs without reducing your profit per acre, that's less risk in these systems. And so this is an example of how adding some crop diversity into a conventional system led to this input reduction, improvements in soil health, less erosion, less nutrient leaching, less toxicity in the freshwater. So now let's move over to an organic system, a regenerative organic system that has also been done at Iowa State in this LTAR research site. And same thing, this study's been going on for about 25 years, and it's comparing a conventional corn and soybean rotation here to an organic corn and soybean and small grain rotation, and then a more diverse 4-year rotation that's done organically. So very similar crop rotations to the conventional system. And I did pull these figures from these slides here. You can connect a lot of great results if you want to dive into this study a little more as well. But basically what they're showing here is that these diverse organic rotations consistently were more profitable per acre. And research at the Rodale Institute with the farming system trial has shown the same thing. And even without organic premiums, the Rodale Institute's trial in Pennsylvania has showed that the profitability of these systems is more than these conventional simple rotations. But the organic system also has the advantage of having those price premiums for these crops that are being grown. And over the course of the whole rotation, these organic systems were $50 to $400 more profitable than the conventional corn and soybean rotation. And they were also improving soil health. They showed more organic carbon, more total nitrogen, more extractable potassium, more extractable calcium, and the soybeans even had significantly higher protein content when compared to that very simplistic conventional rotation. And if you want to dive into these papers a little more, these are right here. And so both of these studies have really shown the clear benefits of diversifying into a 3 and 4 year rotation. So our goal here at the Rodale Midwest Center was to understand how we can build upon these rotations and the successes they've had to demonstrate different 4-year rotations. And so I want to talk now for the rest of the time here about our diverse systems trial that we've just started here at the Midwest Center. And so this is an overhead picture of our field. It's about 15 acres total. And you can see here, we've got 4 replicates of these various rotations. And I'll dive through it a little more in detail here. But essentially what we've done is we looked at the results of these trials, the successes here at Iowa State, the successes in Pennsylvania with the Rodale Institute's farming systems trial there. And we said, how can we show, a more variety of 4-year rotations, and then also integrate livestock grazing. There's a lot of talk about livestock integration into some of these row cropping systems, but there really hasn't been long-term trials that have compared livestock grazing to no grazing. And so we're really excited about that and adding that component into this trial. And so our main objective here with this trial that we just started, we're in year 1, still kind of finishing up the harvest here of year 1, is to evaluate the impact of these diverse crop rotations and livestock grazing, evaluating the impact of that on soil health and farm profitability. So the hypothesis is that these diverse crop rotations and livestock integration will improve soil health and fertility and disrupt these weed cycles. By improving the fertility and disrupting these weed cycles, we can maintain high crop yields that require less inputs, and thus we're resulting in improved profitability of the entire rotation. And I underline entire rotation here because that's a catching point on this, is that people think, oh, corn is the most profitable crop I can grow. I should grow that as much as possible. But when you look at the entire rotation, and yeah, a small grain might have less profit per acre in that year, the impacts that it has on disrupting weed cycles and improving soil fertility, along with some cover crops, is that the corn year that follows that then has less inputs going into it. So it's about input reduction, and you're actually improving the profitability of the whole system because you're reducing your costs for the whole rotation as well. And so I want to discuss some of the rotations that we decided on. We really took a bottom-up approach when we were designing this study, meeting with different members of academia at Iowa State, talking with local producers around here, working with our organic consultants, and getting as many opinions on this as possible and determining what is the most feasible way to add crop diversity into these Midwestern row crop systems. Well, step 1 is that we got to have corn and soybeans in these rotations. So every single one of our rotations starts with corn, followed by soybeans, but then it diverges into either winter wheat or oats or rye. And then there's a 4th year of that rotation that's either going to be spring peas, pasture, or millet. So you can see the numbers here underneath them represent the numbering in these different plots here. So spring peas follows wheat, pasture follows oats, and millet follows rye. I'll show you this picture real quick. It gives you a little bit better view of it. So you can see we have these large blocks here of rectangles. So we're growing all corn there, but in the small grain year, we have them separated into smaller blocks that are showing the wheat, the oats, and the rye that are growing in those systems. And then same with the diverse crops as well. So we have millet, our peas, and pasture. So we formulated these rotations with the mindset that we want to be having an annual livestock grazing event in here. So how could we design these rotations to allow for grazing every year? So what we do is that we will have cattle come onto the farm and they'll graze the corn stalks. Then we'll plant that winter rye cover crop. We'll graze that cover crop before we plant soybeans. And then after soybeans, we'll have our small grains. So 2 winter grains and the spring oats. Then after we harvest those in July, we plant a forage cover crop, which we then graze in the fall. And then that is followed by our diverse crop. So we have either millet or peas, which have a forage cover crop, and then those get grazed in the fall, or the pasture, which gets grazed multiple times each year. And then, of course, we'll be comparing these diverse rotations to some more simplistic 2-year rotations. So we have an organic corn and soybean rotation with a winter rye cover crop on the farm, and we'll be doing soil health analysis at a conventional farm with a corn and soybean rotation to really make some good comparisons between the diverse rotations and the simple ones. But the other main factor being that livestock grazing. So you can see here, we've utilized what's called a split plot design. So we have everything similar in this rectangle, and then we split it down the middle, put a fence up, and graze our livestock on half of that and compare it, have a direct comparison to the other half that's not being grazed and is either going to be mowed or hayed, but no livestock grazing on those. And so you can see here our 4 rotations, our corn, our diverse crops, our small grains, and our soybeans. You can notice here that there's a little bit of discoloration in those 2 halves, and that's because that block has already been grazed this year. So we have 3 steers that we're rotating through our plots. They're about a ½ acre in size here. We've extended them out a little bit into the roadways to make them a little bigger. And they're on those plots for about a week, but you can see the impact that only 3 cattle have over the course of a week, really grazing those plots down effectively. We are in year 1, so we're still working with a small herd. We're kind of working through the logistics of moving them and getting the fences set up. But moving forward in the coming years, this is a long-term trial we want going for as many years as possible. We're shooting to have about 5 or 6 animal units on the plots for each grazing event. So you can see the boys that are moving through our plots right now. We got Chuck, Peter, and George that are enjoying their delicious mixture of forage cover crops. But what this picture is really showing is the infrastructure that we're using to keep them in these plots and effectively move them with as little labor as possible. So we have a water container here with a float to continuously supply water. And then we have temporary electric fencing that we can set up. It doesn't take too much time to get these posts in the ground, string up some electrified fence. They respect the fence very well. So really minimizing that labor as we move them through these different areas of the farm, and not putting too much effort into that side of things as well, which is important for the producers as well. So I want to touch on a few results here. Like I said, we're just now working into this. So this was like some baseline soil sampling that I took back in March. And this is a composite sample of each one of the 16 blocks on the field. And you can see here with this weighted soil health score that pretty much the entire field has a very low soil health score. I don't want to overanalyze what this soil health score is. It's a weighted score that this specific lab uses with carbon respiration and water extractable carbon and nitrogen. Really, it's just a simple metric to give the kind of this high level overview of soil health. But it's not surprising either. This field has spent decades in a conventional corn and soybean rotation, and we're still transitioning to organic. It won't be certified organic until the end of next year. But what I think is a better data point, instead of just a weighted soil health score, is an actual measure of a soil process. And so this data is water infiltration rates that were taken throughout the field over the past month and a half. Shout out and thank you to our research tech, Nathan, who spent the past month and a half taking 72 measurements from all the corn fields and 72 measurements from all the soybean fields to get this infiltration rate. So he put a lot of effort into that. And it really shows how low our soil health is through this metric, that our average infiltration rate is about 0.6 inches per hour in all of these different plots. There's no significant difference between them, which is good, that we're starting pretty consistent with our soil. Moving forward, we will take more samples to analyze what aggregate stability, soil moisture and water holding capacity, microbial diversity, total CNN, all the different soil fertility metrics, and then crop nutrient density as well. So those will be goals for future analysis, but really just kind of showing where we're starting with our baseline and the progress that we have room to grow within this soil as we rebuild the soil health with our rotations and our livestock integration. So a little bit of yield data here. Our yields for our small grains were really, more below average than anything as we kind of work our way in with, lower fertility and some weed issues. Oats were coming out at 57 bushels an acre, test weight of about 36. The test weight's important because that really determines the food or feed grade. So is it getting fed to humans or livestock? So 36 pounds per bushel, which puts it right on the cusp of that test weight. Spring wheat, which will be winter wheat moving forward. So a little bit of an asterisk there. Pretty low at 21 bushels an acre, 56 for the test weight. The millet, the proso millet is still drying down, but out of the combine, it was coming out a little over 1,000 pounds per acre. It was a rough year for peas. Those were only about 12 bushels per acre and a 60-pound test weight. Corn and soybeans to be harvested. So again, really showing the room to grow as we get our soil back to where it needs to be, bring our fertility metrics up as well. And so corn and soybeans are looking great. So we're really excited to see what those yields are. The soybeans here on the right will be harvested in the next week or two, and then we'll plant the winter grains immediately following those. The corn will be harvested in a few weeks, and then we'll graze those corn stalks down with the cattle, plant a winter rye cover crop, which will then be grazed in the spring before the soybean planting. So stay tuned for some of those yield results. And so at this point, I am going to pass it over to our farm manager, Drew Erickson, and he's going to talk a little bit here about some of the management practices we're using here for this project.
Thank you, Sean. So before I get started, I just wanted to rehatch something Sean talked about, which is context. So we've developed these rotations for our farm, our area of the country. It's really important to know, like, we're not expecting any farmer to do exactly what we're doing. We want you to learn from this, diversify your operation in a way that makes sense for you. Maybe cattle don't make sense in your area of the world, but maybe sheep do, or even chickens, depending on the scale of your farm. So with that, we do have neighbors who are cattle farmers, and that's one of our fertility sources. So when they clean out their barn in the winter, we bring it to our farm, and we go through the NOP composting protocols. We also have it sent to labs to test for different pathogens and the nutrient quality of that composted manure. So that's a couple-week process to get through the NOP standards, which is National Organic Program. So that's a specific time that it needs to compost, how many times you need to turn it, and what temperatures you need to achieve. And then we put this compost down ahead of the corn in the rotations. In addition to that, ahead of corn only, we put down a granular, it's a nature safe, OMRI certified, so certified for use on organic farms, and that's a 1300. So in total, we estimated that our corn had about 120 units of nitrogen available per acre. Like Sean said, we haven't harvested it yet, and this is year one, so we will see what the harvest results look like. Go ahead, next, Sean. Planting. So we drill all our small grains. We drill our cover crops. We have an old but trusty tie drill that has both small seed and large seed boxes set up at 8-inch spacing. And then a no-till planter set at 30-inch spacing for our corn and our soybeans. Next. The crop rotations are key to weed management in organic systems and in our system. So small grains do a great job of outcompeting the weeds. They have that allelopathic effect to help reduce some of the weed populations. So you see through our rotations, and we hope to see over the next several years, that different weeds might come and go through, especially through the soybean year. But the small grain is one of the ways we combat that, especially the oats, the year 3 of the oats, rye, winter wheat. Carry on. But not all of them are great. So peas looked really good until they matured. They lost their leaves. They don't have a ton of biomass to help shield against weeds. And then they're also pumping nitrogen into the soil. And so that led to a flush of lamb's quarter, which we knew was out there based on previous years, but we saw very little in the small grains, and they overwhelmed the peas. So we did get some data out of the peas this year. Maybe if we had a swather, we could have tried to get some harvest data through the combine, but this crop was essentially a failure. And that's okay. We're a research farm. We want you to learn from our mistakes. We learn from our mistakes. And so we will go forward. Sean? The soybeans, there is a crop out there, but they're a little weedier. Again, it was a challenging spring with moisture, so tine weeding in a timely manner wasn't always possible. It's great that we got the rain. We certainly needed it, but it made field operations challenging. So you can see here, the big spots are mostly giant ragweed, and then along the south side of this slide, or the bottom of your screen, that's mostly lamb's quarter. So that's in spite of tine weeding and cultivating. Next. So to prep the fields, we do tillage, but our goal is to reduce tillage intensity. So again, we have a Howard rotavator. Maybe you don't, but maybe you want to invest in a chisel plow or something to get away from moldboard plowing and disking and packing. We're able to reduce the depth of our tillage with this machine. It also works very well in the small plots that we have. So that's one of the reasons we do like the Howard. I'm able to make 2 passes in the spring to get plots ready to plant. And in some of the rotations, we will be able to go almost 2 years without a tillage pass. So specifically, our rotation that goes corn, soybeans, oats, underseeded with pasture. And then once that's in pasture, it will stay there for 2 years before the next corn planting. Next. The tine weeder is a very valuable tool in organics. Is fairly new. I think within the last 10 years, these have become very fashionable. I use it extensively in our small grains as well as our row crops like corn and soybeans. So I will tine weed small grains before they've emerged. I tine weed our corn and our soybeans before they've emerged. So that's commonly called the blind pass. So 2 to 3 days after I plant, I will try to get in there and make a pass with the tine weeder. That can be really effective at eliminating some of the smaller annuals like foxtails and lamb's quarter if the conditions are right. And then you can see in the bottom right here, I'm driving over oats that have just emerged. And sometimes I go laterally across the field, or sometimes I go the same way I did with the drill, just depending on the conditions that are out there. Also, throughout the season, I do turn up the pressure. So this specific tine weeder, I have the ability to adjust either the speed I'm driving, the pressure on the tines, or the depth. And so I increase all 3 of those throughout the year. And again, especially in soybeans, you can get very aggressive. Once they've taken root, you can really get aggressive with it. Next slide. In addition to tine weeding, we do cultivating only in the corn and the soybeans. So 2 out of the 4 years of the rotation, we do get a little more aggressive with the weed control. On the right is the old 1950s John Deere cultivator that we have. It does a sufficient job, but eventually we would like to get guidance and a nice shiny buffalo note or high residue cultivator that would streamline our weed management. Next. The last piece of equipment that I use to manage our diverse systems trial is a stalk chopper. Most of the tools I have are kind of this 10-foot width. So it just, again, that's what works for these small research plots. All of this is scalable, either up or down, depending on your operation. And we use the flail mower mostly for breaking down residues. Like if we've grazed some of the corn stalks, but we'll need to do something to manage the other corn stalks so that we can try to get a cover crop. So we use the the flail mower or stalk chopper to break down cover crops, or sorry, stalks. I think that's my last slide, correct?
It is. Yeah. Thank you, Drew, for that overview of the equipment. And so I want to circle back to a little bit more on some diversity as we kind of wrap this up here in the next few slides. And so you might be asking after all of this, like, it seems clear that having crop diversity is more profitable. It's better for the soil health. Like, why aren't we doing it more? Why are so many rotations just corn and soybeans? Well, it's one answer, and it's written right there for you. It's the markets. Our current agricultural system is so heavily dependent and focused on corn and soybean processing that there's really only sporadic grain processors and buyers around the Midwest that are going to buy some of these small grains or the peas, or a majority of the time you have to sell them for livestock feed. And so that's a little frustrating. It's something that's a little bit outside of our control. We are doing what we can. There's a group within Rodale that works specifically on market development. We're doing what we can around the Midwest to work with different organizations to really help market some of these diverse crops, some of these regenerative organic products. We know farmers that are getting creative and doing direct marketing by selling to consumers through online stores or farmers markets, or growing a small grain to sell to their neighbors for their livestock operation, or growing it for their own livestock. They're finding whatever way they can to diversify their rotations and kind of, fight against the tide that's really pushing towards only corn and soybean monocultures. That, the agricultural policies in this country and the markets that are there because of that are really ingrained. We're not going to let that stop us, but at the same time, it's definitely the biggest challenge, and we're doing what we can to try to help producers work through it and work behind the scenes to try to shift those a little more. But like Drew mentioned, and I want to reiterate as well, like, we designed this study so that the producer has as much flexibility as possible to respond to their own unique skills, equipment, climate, available markets, because it doesn't matter, which small grain you grow. It's just a matter of trying to grow one of those small grains or trying to grow a diverse cover crop. Like, that detail doesn't matter. Really, the biggest goal is just find a way to diversify in whatever way you can. Add something else into that corn and soybean rotation. And so that's where I want to kind of finish up, is talking about some of the other ways that producers can diversify. So we're focused on diverse grain cropping, row cropping systems with cattle grazing, but there are other types of livestock you can integrate. You can do rotational grazing with that livestock to restore pasture quality. You can integrate multiple types of livestock. We know a producer that does sheep followed by cows, and you can bring chickens on there after them. We've grazed cow or goats here at the MOC before. You can see that picture in the bottom left. And then we've also had chickens integrated with some corn. So really just whatever livestock is available, try to get them out there on those plots and get those natural sources of fertility going. Another way to diversify is with perennials. And so a perennial grain that the Land Institute is working on doing some development with is kernza. It's a perennial wheatgrass. So you can see here the root system of that perennial grain on the right, and then the root system of the annual grain, in this case, wheat, on the left. That perennial grain can have a root system that goes 10 feet into the ground. And you're asking, well, why aren't people doing it? Well, it's markets. It comes back to markets every time. There's not really great places to sell kernza. The yield is still a little behind where it should be. So the Land Institute is doing some breeding to try to bring that yield up so it's more competitive. But there's products out there like this beer from Patagonia and Dogfish Head that's a kernza Pilsner. There's some kernza flowers out there. Another way to diversify is agroforestry. So integrating trees into farms or growing crops between trees, like this picture here from the University of Missouri shows, that's replicating the oak savanna transition ground that essentially a lot of the Midwest was back in the day, of a little bit of trees and then a little bit of grass and a little bit of trees. And so that's another way to do this diversity, to diversify these systems. The Savannah Institute is someone who does a lot of great work with that, if you're interested in pursuing that avenue. Silvopasture is another form of agroforestry where you're grazing livestock between trees. So you could have rows of chestnuts or fruit, and then you're grazing different cattle or sheep or goats, or in this case, chickens. The Regenerative Ag Alliance does great work with pastured chickens in these systems. So the main point being, there's a lot of different ways to diversify. We're focusing on a specific system at the MOC. These other organizations are focusing on different ways to diversify. And that's really what we're trying to encourage with this webinar today as well, is that we need to add some diversity into our corn and soybean rotations to give us more resiliency in our soils, more resiliencies in our community, more resiliency in the economic sides of farming. So find a way to diversify your system that fits your skills, your climate, your markets. That's really the primary point. It doesn't have to be cut and dry with what we're doing or anyone else is doing. Just find a way that works for you. A regenerative system is one that rebuilds soil health and improves that ecosystem diversity. And so that's what diversifying our cropping systems lead to, is these regeneratively managed systems that are rebuilding soil health. I heard a great way of describing soil or regenerative systems the other day, that if you have more living things in your farm this year than last year, that's a regenerative system. It doesn't have to be overly complicated. And so lastly, we're in year one with our diverse systems trial. So our goal here was just to kind of let you know that we're doing this. Like, stay tuned as we finish up our year one harvest. We really hit our stride next year in year two, really become certified organic by the end of next year, and really have a true regenerative organic system, and really develop better long-term data. Our goal is to have a trial that lasts as long as the Rodale Institute in Pennsylvania, and their trial that went 40 is still going 40 plus years with the farming systems trial. We want this to be the Midwest version of that. So stay tuned, come visit us. Our primary goal is to educate. We are always available to answer any questions about the research we do, and stop by any of the events or the farm at some point to have discussions with us. So best management practices, ask questions about our research. We have an annual field day here at the Midwest Center. We're just outside of Cedar Rapids, Iowa. I don't think I ever mentioned that, but just north of Cedar Rapids. Our field day is the Tuesday after the July 4th weekend. This is a picture from our field day last year with Drew giving a presentation about cover cropping and termination techniques in soybean production. We're always available to host farm tours. We had a great group of producers by the other day that the Iowa Organic Association brought by. So reach out to us to schedule a farm tour. We have annual webinars like this one, where we'll be discussing kind of updates as we progress with this study and some of the other projects we're doing here at the MOC. And come visit us or other members of the Midwest team at these regional agricultural conferences this summer. Between our crew here at the MOC and our organic consultants, we are at almost every agricultural conference that happens over the next few months. The first one we'll be going to is the Iowa Organic Conference. That happens in November. We'll be there with a table to discuss some of this. I'll also be speaking about livestock grazing and organic row crop rotations. So come stop by and say hi there. So I want to leave you with this, just a link to a couple resources here. So on the upper left, we have our a QR code that'll link you to some of our organic consultancy. You can schedule an on-site visit. They'll come out to your farm and talk with you about how you can potentially transition to organic. This QR code will take you to our Regional Research Center page. You can find the MOC on there, sign up for our quarterly newsletter, and stay up to date on all the activities we're doing. And then this is my email and Drew's email. So again, do not hesitate to reach out, ask us any questions, set up a farm tour, and we'd be happy to host you. So I am going to leave this up for a moment while I have a little bit of water and recover my voice. And then we will dive into some Q&A here shortly. So thank you very much for listening, and put those questions in the Q&A tab, and we will get to those in a moment. Thank you.
So while Sean grabs a little bit of water, I'll tackle the one question that I can, which is flail mower versus brush hog. A brush hog, it may be sufficient. I think the only reason I lean towards a flail mower in our operation is it does a really good job of keeping the residue where we want it, instead of having a sideways spinning blade that throws the residue to one side and drops it. The flail mower or stock chopper will drop all of the residue straight down back onto the field. So thank you for that question, Janet. Sean, are you ready? I can just read you the questions.
Yeah, go for it. If you want to read off some questions, that works. I just kind of pulled them up as well.
Okay, so I apologize for the name already, but Serini Vasa has a couple of questions that we'll try to get through. Is biological status of soil taken into account for evaluating soil health?
So yes, in two accounts. And so the soil health metric I showed uses respiration rates from the microbiome as part of their weighted soil health score. We will also in the future be taking PLFA samples, so the phospholipid fatty acids, and that gives a good overview, kind of high level overview of microbiome composition, bacterial fungal ratios, stuff like that. But every year we definitely will be at least getting the microbial respiration rate, which is one of the key indicators of soil health.
Okay, Serini Vasa, I will get back to your questions, but in the interest of timeliness, I'm going to jump ahead. Claudia asks, are there any future plans for buckwheat? Claudia, we have experimented with buckwheat quite a bit. It was one of the crops we were considering for this, but the DST is not our only trial. So there's all kinds of opportunities around our farm for other diverse crop studies. We're looking into potentially doing an amaranth study or a mung bean study. And there may be room for a buckwheat study, or even an intercropping corn with buckwheat is often a popular topic. Sean, anything else you want to add to that?
No, I think you covered it. I mean, the answer is no for the DST, but I think, like you said, we have other spots on the farm we use it. We love buckwheat. I mean, we throw it as a cover crop. Like if we have a bare patch of soil, we need something to quickly grow and be a great pollinator, and then it reseeds itself after like 45 days. So we love using buckwheat. Also a great phosphorus mineralizer. It really puts phosphorus into a good available form for subsequent plants. So highly recommended as a cover crop. We're not using it as a cover crop in the DST either. I didn't really talk about our cover crops there. We're using just essentially some grasses, legumes, a brassica. Buckwheat doesn't have much forage value, not really great for that. So we didn't include it there, but I'd highly recommend it as a cover crop if you're not trying to graze cattle on it and get some good forage quality out of it.
Excellent if you're grazing bees, though. You can get a lot of honey per acre with buckwheat. I digress. Can you talk a little bit more about markets? This is from an anonymous attendee. Both one, the opportunities to improve markets for production from diversified production systems, and two, what worked well, success stories.
It's a tough one. And I see another question in there that was talking about what's holding people back. And it's the same thing. It's this market. And it's tough because these markets are really tied to government policy. And like, we can't really influence government policy from our set, aside from just being a citizen that votes. So that's a huge challenge. What's worked well? I mean, we're working with organizations, some of these food webs. So there's the Southeast Iowa Food Web, there's the Iowa Food Systems Coalition. There's these local groups that are trying to promote more sustainable agriculture, and local agriculture, I guess is the better way to put it, like growing food for people. Yeah, I don't have a great answer for you. It's the biggest challenge. My recommendation is get creative. Like, find somewhere to sell it or use it on your farm, do something, grow cover crop. There's a lot of ways to do it, but yeah, it's frustrating. Drew, do you have anything to add that's not being frustrated like I am?
Yeah, call legislators, call Quaker Oats and tell them you want domestic organic oats in your food. It's a big picture issue that needs to be tackled. But it's a shift in our entire system is what we're pushing for and what we're advocating. Okay, besides infiltration rates, what other in-field measurements are you taking to quantify soil health?
So we'll be doing wet aggregate stability. We'll be doing the whole suite of like soil fertility, so all the different nutrients, organic matter, C to N. We will also be doing soil moisture and temperature, EC, compaction. Some of those are more related to the livestock question because there are concerns from producers that if you integrate livestock into your system, that they can actually increase compaction, potentially increase salts as well at too high of a concentration. And so, yeah, really trying to hit on all the different ones as possible. I think that pretty much covers the main ones we're doing though. Microbial respiration, I said it already, but that's a super important one. It's included with the soil analysis we do. So the Soil Health Institute, I think, says organic matter, carbon respiration rates, and wet aggregate stability are the three most important metrics of soil health. So we'll be hitting all of those for sure.
The way that was asked by Chuck, thank you for that question, Chuck. An anonymous attendee asks, with all the fall grazing, what roots are growing over the winter?
Sorry, getting distracted here by the questions.
I can take that one. So
Okay.
we again, we will be grazing fall corn stalks and then planting rye into that field. We're not hoping to be roller crimping that rye. We just want to have living roots over the winter. So even if we just get germination, and then we graze that specific crop in the spring. In the other crop rotations or like further on in the crop rotations, our goal isn't to overgraze anything. So a lot of these systems have biannual red clover in them or other like crimson clover that will overwinter. So we definitely took that into consideration. We understand that continuous living root principle and are trying as best as we can to abide by that.
Yeah, I think just to add on to that, there's really only we should have living roots in the system year round, except for before oats. I think from the soybeans to oats, it will be the only time that there isn't actually a cover crop or living roots in there. Otherwise, it should be year round with everything.
Don, I'm going to jump back to a question from Janet, who said, and I don't know that you will have the answer to this, but please discuss the apparent increase in labor inputs in the Iowa diversity study. I think that's Matt Liebman's study and graph.
Let me think here. Yeah, okay, so I don't have a good direct answer. I would suggest diving into that paper. It's an open access paper that anyone can pull up and read. It's a great read, great study. It's a shame that that project has not been promoted more and it's been going on for like 20 years. I would just say in general, that is why another big reason corn and soybean rotations are so prevalent. Like it's a lot easier just to go back and forth between those two when you're talking like extra labor of cover crops after small grains at different harvest dates. There's just in general a little more labor with a 3 and 4 year rotation. So not saying that's exactly why that in their study they showed, but I would say in general that's a reason. But I highly recommend going and checking that paper out.
And then Rajani asked, what is the best winter cover crop for USDA Zone 6B? And Rajani, I would suggest that you reach out to our consultants who are very regional and we'll get on the phone with you and talk to you about your specific location, what you're trying to grow. Like what cover crop may have a lot to do with what you're trying to grow following that cover crop. Don, some of these are more or less repetitive. I don't know if you any of the
Let's
other.
see. Trying to go through them as well.
If you click the answered tab, you can see 2 that I just said we would answer during this. We already answered Janet's, but Serini Vasa had another question in there.
Oh, the density and diversity. Yeah, in general, I mean, it'll be PLFA for all the microbial analysis. That's also dependent on getting some different funding. It'll be respiration just in general every year. So it looks like another question, how to ensure crop diversification in temperate farming conditions, which choice of crops is restricted? I would say in general, like we said, it's flexibility. Like all of this is flexibility in terms of what works for you, what works for your climate, what works for the available markets. If you have super specific regional questions, then I would highly suggest reaching out to our organic consultants. It's on the Rodale website, the Organic Consultancy. They do some great work. They can answer your questions like that. And they can also, if you're interested in transitioning to organic and learning more about this and checking out your specific farm, you can schedule an on-site visit for them. So anything specific in that sense, that would be my general recommendation. So I'm not seeing any more new questions. So I would say final call on new questions. If you want to, any more questions, if you want to put them in the chat or the Q&A here. Other than that, I think we can wrap this up. Yeah, not seeing anything else come through, but yeah, thank you so much. Like we mentioned before, this will be posted on the Rodale website in the coming weeks. Don't hesitate to reach out. We'd love to hear from you. And everyone just keep fighting the good fight out there.